RETEACH, podcast for teachers seeking fresh viewpoints, deeper subject knowledge, and diverse thinking.
Everybody, and welcome to this episode of the History RETEACH podcast. I'm absolutely thrilled to announce that this is episode 1 of series 2. And to get us off to a flying start, we've got a double bill. I'm thrilled because we've got two people, Alex Fairlamb and Rachel Ball. Now, these guys are, how can I say this, self-confessed edu geeks, I think, is a great way of describing them, because they're into absolutely everything, history and teaching and everything in between. And what they've been busy with recently is editing a really fabulous volume called What is History Teaching Now? A practical handbook for all history teachers and educators. So Alex and Rachel, welcome to the RETEACH History podcast.
Hello. Hello. Thank you very much for having us, Carmel.
You're very welcome. My pleasure. Now then, as I've just said, you've been busy editing this book. I've been looking into this book, and I'm going to give our listeners a little taster of some of the numbers before I introduce you both. So get your ears round this, listeners. There are 44 chapters. I think I'm right in saying over 25 contributors, 521 pages. The two editors, which we have here, of course, they've both contributed to 4 chapters each. And very, very importantly, on Amazon, 5-star reviews. So I cannot speak highly enough of this volume. I could wax lyrical all night. But let me introduce the two ladies concerned. So Alex Fairlamb is a senior leader in charge of teaching, learning and CPD based in the Northeast. She's an SLE and an ELE and a proud member of the Historical Association Secondary Committee, the Northeast Historical Association branch and the school's Northeast Steering Board. Alex is a history teacher and a former lead practitioner of history and teaching and learning with a strong commitment to ensuring that curriculums are diverse. Now, if we just scamper from the northeast to the northwest, we've got Rachel Ball, a senior leader in charge of teaching, learning and CPD and an SLE based in Salford, Greater Manchester. She is also a passionate history teacher with more than 20 years experience. Rachel tweets as at Mrs. Ball AP, blogs at www.theeducationalimposters.wordpress.com and is the co-editor of the recently published book. So, ladies, this book is spearheading, leading the way. Mary Myatt calls it a benchmark for other subjects to follow. So, what on earth motivated you both to write it?
Well, I think we're both passionate historians and, we're constantly trying to keep abreast of different historical research, both in terms of content, but also pedagogy as well. And myself doing my PGC, there were some, key tomes out there by husbands and there was Kitson's book. And I just remembered how useful it was when I was training to have that there as kind of a piece of kind of guidance. And whilst other texts have been produced since long ago, since I did my PGCE, it's far longer than I care to say, things have moved forward quite a lot in terms of the content that we teach, more diversity, perhaps some of the cog sci, which has, become more to the forefront of pedagogical practice. So it just seemed like a pertinent time to kind of draw upon the expertise of so many different practitioners, whether classroom-based or educators, in order to pull all of that kind of more recent thinking together into a really usable handbook, which would be accessible for the broad range of different career stages, from ITT all the way up to, someone who is an SLT link for history. There have been a lot of positive developments in evidence, but that in itself is kind of like a vast ocean, and that can be quite overwhelming. Where do I start with these pieces of information, and how then do I, as a head of department, then engage my team in accessing content to be explored, such as the medieval kingdom of Benin, or how do we approach literacy within history? So it just seemed like a good opportunity to pull all of that great thinking together in one accessible text, but then also kind of whet the appetites by suggesting further places where people could access other articles such as Historical Association, etc., etc. Because, I mean, as you kind of clearly introduced us, we are massively into our CPD. We lead CPD, and so we're aware of kind of what is needed to empower heads of department to develop their teams and nurture their practice.
And the structure and the format seems to lend itself to that use as well, the way it's set out. Was that something that you considered when you thought of it as a handbook?
Yeah, definitely. We really thought about what would be most useful. So perhaps for heads of departments leading CPD with their teams, and the format really allows them to kind of go off and read a section, but then come back. They've got summary questions at the end of every paragraph, so every chapter rather, to kind of start conversations off. And then the further reading they can take forward. So for example, for a head of department or for a mentor in their ECT sitting down to plan together, they can use the chapters to start with, but then know they can go off and find more information if they need to.
So I was looking, I noticed you've got 5 reflection questions at the end of each of these chapters, and then 3 resources or questions for digging deeper as well. So it doesn't profess to provide all of the answers, but it whets the appetite and it allows teachers, I guess, to dip in. I mentioned the range of contributors, and very reassuring in its tone, I feel. What surprised you about the submissions that you got?
I'm not sure if surprise is the right word, but I think for both of us, we were just struck by the quality of it, because we've obviously been fortunate enough to encounter either, some resources or with the contributors or had conversations with them, but then to actually see their writing. For some of them, it was the first time that we'd ever seen their writing, and to kind of wake up each morning and kind of proofread these absolutely compelling chapters was an absolute joy. And I know that me and Rachel would voice note each other excitedly each morning, be like, oh my God, have you seen what this person's written? And have you read this? And going into work feeling, absolutely full of kind of like joy and excitement about to teach, knowing that there were these great chapters out there. So I think the quality of it is something which we were really struck by. Not that we weren't expecting high quality from these people. It's just, it was our first perhaps opportunity to read what they'd written. I think some other things was, as historians, we're always learning. There's never going to be a time where we can say that we know everything about history. And so actually reading some of the chapters, such as the one on Gypsy Roma Traveller by Helen, that one was really, really powerful. And actually hearing Rich Kerridge talk about the work of GRT studying last week, clearly identifies the levels of discrimination towards GRT and how perhaps GRT are not reflected in our curriculum. And so reading that chapter by Helen really kind of pulled together all of that kind of obvious information about that discrimination. And Rich kind of talks about, not in the book, but he talks about the fact that GRT racism is probably one of the last acceptable forms of racism that there seems to be, and that actually, if you don't have GRT history in your curriculum, then you can't really say it's diverse. So reading that chapter that Helen had written, drawing all of that together, I learned so much about how we should tackle it, how we should address negativity and ensure visibility within the curriculum. Likewise, when I was looking at the environmental chapter, the obvious ones that I knew of was the Industrial Revolution. That would be an obvious thing to consider environmental factors, but I hadn't considered, the transatlantic slave trade and exploration and the impact upon Indigenous communities and environments. And again, with Christian's chapter on Chinese history, I'm quite well versed in Mao. But earlier than that, my knowledge of Chinese history is really quite weak. And so actually, when he has a paragraph where he's talking about begin with the geography, like the Yangtze River and things like that, he really just brought to life this area of history that I do have limited knowledge. And as a result, I've gone on and bought 2 books by Zhong Chang as a result of it. So I blame him for my Amazon basket, if I'm honest.
That's fantastic. Absolutely. The wealth, I'm looking at it as well. It just you've got Restoring Indigenous Presence, thanks to Alex Ford. You've got Rebecca on LGBTQ+, even one called Don't Panic, How to Teach Difficult Histories by Kate Smee. So it's so reassuring. Rachel, was there anything that struck you that sort of surprised you or you learned when you were editing the book?
I think I very much echo what Alex said, just about the quality and the range of what was written. but also getting a sort of a peek into these writers' classrooms as well, because it is very much rooted in classroom practice. So teachers sharing their, some of their student work and their real schemes of learning and their real resources, and actually feeling a little bit about what it would be like to be taught by these amazing historians. That was something special, I think. The fact that it is just so rooted, it's not beyond the reach of perhaps an ECT picking up the book. This is realistic. And I think something that Alex hinted at in the first question, really, I would just echo that it was really, really important to us that this book was accessible. I think sometimes it can feel really daunting, especially as a teacher early on in their career, to pick up a book and feel like everyone's doing all this amazing stuff and so much more brilliant than you. And, it can be really difficult. But to pick up a book that is more inspiring rather than making you think this isn't something I could ever achieve myself, I think that was really important. And we know teachers are incredibly busy as well and don't have lots and lots of time to be able to read in depth. And again, that was important to us to keep the chapters fairly succinct so they were manageable, and so they could be read, for example, in a team meeting or before a meeting and then discussed.
Yeah, I think the chapters on average maybe about 10 pages long, let's say, with loads of lovely diagrams and illustrations and takeaway templates as well. You've got Patrick O'Shaughnessy with his sixth form history symposium, Dan Lyndon Cohen with the tape letters archive. These are actual practical case studies. You've got Sally Thorne drawing on economics and ripple diagrams when talking about consequences. There are so many useful takeaways. I'm hesitating on this question now because I'm not suggesting you've got any favourites, but are there any real gems or takeaways that you thought, wowzer, I'm using that tomorrow in my lessons? Alex, what do you think?
So I think because I saw Sasha presenting on this not long after I'd read her chapter, which is Empire and the use of cultural artifacts. So Empire is a very commonly taught one as part of the national curriculum. It's very likely that it'll pop up in a Key Stage 4 and potentially Key Stage 5 curriculum. But I'd never thought about how I could teach it through objects like the Acandro, and the way that she talks about how you can explain Empire in a way which brings to light. She shared the stats on Pupil Voice, which afterwards demonstrated the kids absolutely loved an assessment on Empire, because what they'd done is they found out about these different objects, and then they had created their own museum exhibit as part of their assessment. And the way that she explains how she piques the interest of the children is so, so powerful, because for me, it's very obvious to see within her chapter how she's transformed their thinking in the classroom, but she's also changed them as actual individuals as well. Because that they're going to be going to museums and they're going to be looking at objects rather than passively going by them or perhaps reading the blurb underneath and kind of not really taking it in. They're going to be asking some really key historical questions, because through her approach to those different objects at the Academy, they've been asked to kind of interrogate and find out what the narrative is, the hidden stories there. And I just thought that was really, really powerful. I really enjoyed that chapter.
I think that tangible material culture, making it visual, artifact handling is very accessible to learners as well, isn't it? So that's fantastic. Thanks, Alex. Rachel, how about you?
Oh, I don't think I really have any favourites. I think the chapters that really stood out for me were the ones where I felt like my knowledge was weak and I was really learning as I was editing the chapters. So we mentioned Kate Smee's chapter on difficult history earlier on. I just think that's such a powerful history and a lot of challenge there about not avoiding the things that can sometimes seem tricky or you feel like you don't want to get wrong. But she really sets out some really manageable strategies for teaching more difficult history. And I think we also already mentioned the chapter on Gypsy Roma history, but that chapter as well by Helen Stelson. Again, I learned so much from reading that. And it's not something that we had yet really put into our curriculum, but feeling the challenge in that chapter about how we could do that really successfully. And I think finally, the other chapter that really stood out for me was the one on scholarship by Sasha again, and also Katie Amory. And again, I think that's something that has become much more prolific in history teaching now. I think history teachers are a lot more confident to use scholarship in the classroom. But there will be some teachers out there that will be looking at this for the first time. And I think we were really conscious when we started the book that this would be a book not just for teachers on Twitter, but for all history teachers up and down the country. And I think it breaks down how you can make scholarship meaningful in your lesson in really manageable chunks, with some great examples from both of their teaching as well.
I think you're absolutely right. Busy teachers. I mean, the RETEACH website points out new scholarship and ways of looking at different topics with, through different lenses in your classrooms as well. So that might be a place for teachers to go after they've listened to this recording, hopefully as well. Also, I'm struck by your honesty. You both mentioned there how much you've been learning and perhaps maybe some of the traps and pitfalls that you're preventing other teachers falling into based upon your own experience. Would you say that's true as well?
100%. Yeah, I think both of us said earlier, we've both been teaching a long time, and we've probably made every mistake in the book along the way, not just in terms of history teaching, but in terms of leadership and all sorts of things. And I think one of the most important things you can do as a leader is to be humble and recognize that you haven't always got it right, and also that you don't know everything, and we definitely don't. But yeah, I think just always wanting to learn more.
It can be daunting and overwhelming, but I guess what we're hoping is that instead let it be motivational to try and find out these different things and being honest about it. Because, when you first begin in the profession as an ITT, you are asked to do subject audit knowledge. And I believe that that's something that we should continue throughout our profession, because the curriculum is organic and it's changing. Scholarship is always evolving. There are new sources. Please God, no new specifications for now. But, you've also got to be thinking about how you've got to keep on keeping that knowledge up to date, reading different articles. And it can be really quite healthy to do that, because then you can also reflect on how far you've come with your subject knowledge. I think as well, in my chapter on sources, I talk about very much the mistakes that I've made, because when you train, you trained with the best intent and with the, the evidence which is out there at the time and the practice which is out there at the time. But we do move forward and things do evolve. And as a result of that, we do see a hangover effect in some schools and in some curriculums. So it's about sharing with a broad range of different people. Okay, this is what was done at some point. It might still be taking place in your classroom, but actually here are some suggestions about ways which are now perhaps more approachable or better ways to do it. So if we talk about differentiation, for example, we know if we'd written this book probably about 10 years ago, that would have been about tiered tasks and, tiered objectives, where we know that that's very much not the case. We teach the top, it's scaffolding. And that's why Rachel's chapter is really, really powerful if you are in a school that still isn't using kind of like the chili charts and, 17 different tasks for 32 different children in the classroom.
I think it's very reassuring as well, your honesty and the composition and range of contributors. You seem to have people at all kind of ages and stages of their careers who, have been teaching for a long time, been experienced, seasoned heads of department, and at the same time, people who are pretty new to it as well, bringing their perspective and their fresh eyes. And that's something, each chapter has its own unique sort of tone. You haven't knocked the individuals out of it in a strive for uniformity. Each chapter is a little mini snippet in itself. And I think that's what gives it the variety and the colour. It's just absolutely lovely. How do you imagine, you mentioned you're both very into CPD, how do you envisage and imagine it might be used in schools? Rachel, what do you think?
So what we know is that teachers need really, really good subject knowledge. And there's quite a lot of data out there that tells us that it is still really lacking in schools. With the pressure on directed time, there just isn't always opportunity for departments to get together and spend, a lot of time specifically on subject knowledge. So we saw this book as being perhaps a helping hand with that particular aspect. So my own school, the history department, for example, we quite often will read a book together. So we'll read a chapter, we'll come to our meeting and we'll discuss what we found and the implications for our curriculum. So we really see it being used in that sort of sense to kind of facilitate department meetings and for heads of department to be able to pick up and use. I mentioned earlier as well about mentor conversations. So one way we really saw it being used is possibly between a mentor and their ECT or their ITT, and being able to facilitate kind of real thinking about history curriculum and teaching and pedagogy and history as like a starter to a conversation.
Yeah, and I think some other ways that you can use it as well as is part of kind of coaching and development as well. So as Rachel said, with ITTs and ECTs, but if you are working in a school such as Rachel's where they use instructional coaching, it's how that coaching process can be supplemented with some subject disciplinary reading. I think as well, it helps to support in terms of if you are an SLT link as well. So as an SLT link, you are expected to kind of quality show and have conversations with the head of history and be able to kind of really ask some really interesting and thoughtful questions, which is going to help develop that curriculum and get them to think about the curriculum in different ways. So we're hoping that the chapters will therefore, particularly on assessment and curriculum, scaffolding and literacy, will be ones which, SLT links, whether that be for the department or the literacy lead or the CPD lead, can then have really thoughtful conversations with that HOD and say, okay, so I've read this about scaffolding. Talk me through what that looks like within our history department in our own individual context. Because it really is got to be a case that the SLT link do know about the subject which they line manage and make them feel seen and make them feel visible as well. I think another way that it can be used is that also if you're on mat leave as well. I myself don't have children, but I do know a few people who've been on mat leave. And, it's a wonderful time, but then taking that step back into the classroom, it can kind of seem quite daunting after a period of time off. And so actually having this text, which you could kind of read during your mat leave to kind of keep yourself up to date and kind of dip in and dip out of stuff for your kit days, I think could be really powerful too.
Oh, that's a really great suggestion and really wide ranging. I'd have loved it to be in existence when I was a head of department. Without a doubt, we used to be constantly reviewing and updating and planning our curriculums. And this is just such a great starter for 10, to get people thinking, to generate that conversation, but very reassuring as well. Now, we mentioned the running to stand still, which many history teachers and heads of department can feel. There might be one-man bands out there. There might be huge departments out there. What do you think lies ahead next? Do you think there may well be a sequel, dare I ask, with other chapters or even updating the chapters that you currently have? We mentioned how quickly things go out of date. Where do you see things going from here?
I mean, it's definitely something that we've had a conversation about. Alex and I have often talked and kind of said, oh, we should have had a chapter on this, or this would be really good to include in a second book. So it is something we have talked about. We don't have any immediate plans. We've got another little project on the way. So we don't have any immediate plans, but I think possibly there could be something in the future. You never know what's going to happen. But, there are, just for example, I'm really interested in the teaching of boys. And I think sometimes as history teachers, we make sort of really cliched mistakes about, boys need history about war and guns and all of that. And I think that could be something really interesting to explore in a second book. We had lots of other ideas, didn't we, Alex?
Yeah, that's it. It was one of those ones where we realised that we're up to 40 odd chapters that we better kind of call the ball on it. And so, our foreword, we do kind of talk about, there are gaps in the book and we kind of make our apologies. We couldn't cover everything in one book. And that isn't that topics weren't pertinent. It was just at that time, we knew in those particular areas where there was some great expertise. And I jokingly said at AHA when I was doing a presentation on women's history, there's not a chapter on women's history in this book. So, I think it would be really great in a few years' time, maybe a couple of years, 3 years' time, to kind of explore how things have evolved and moved forward, but then also create the space for those. I'm doing a lot of work on disability history, which I only really begun to become more knowledgeable about in the past few months. And I'd like again to kind of spend a year, 2 years kind of further developing that information. And there'll be areas of the curriculum, like I think South American history. There's a bit of a kind of blind spot there in medieval India. I think there's a bit of a blind spot there. So I think it would be good to give it some breathing space to allow work and inquiries to evolve and grow so that we bring something new to the table. But that's not to say that in the meantime, there won't be opportunities where, we already taken part in talks, we're taking part in a podcast, where perhaps we've got the opportunity to continue sharing and building upon the existing book. But I think one of the really nice legacies of the book is seeing, the practitioners who contributed, who were amazing in their field, absolutely amazing, but how they have also then gone on to explore other opportunities linked to the book as well. And that's wonderful to see. So really, really happy with that.
Oh, you should be so proud. And I think there's a certain amount of credibility because all the contributors had actually practiced, what they preached. They were walking the walk as well as talking the talk. And they could put forward, look, this is what happened in my classroom. This is what went well. This is what went less well. This is what I suggest you might want to do. So it's practical, it's pedagogical, but it's not preachy at all. And I think that's really, really important. And it makes the reader feel very reassured and they get lots and lots of takeaways from it. And I know that from my work in school, so many teachers are reading it. I'm going to be doing some work with local authorities and referring them to it as well. And the different chapters, wherever there are gaps, this helps to fill them, certainly. And I'm really pleased that you give us a little teaser there that you're working on other projects. So we shall look out for those with interest. Fantastic. Is there anything more that you'd like to say or add? Because I have thoroughly enjoyed listening to you both. I really appreciate you giving up your time. It's a fabulous addition to any history department or any school CPD library, I would say. I reckon other subjects are going to follow the lead here. So is there anything else you'd like to say by way of a closing comment before we go?
I think just a big thank you to all of the contributors who worked so hard to meet kind of quite tight deadlines. Many of the contributors were practicing classroom teachers. So, you're talking about year 11 mocks and all that sort of thing. But we also had people who were on mat leave or had very busy work schedules. So the fact that they have contributed to the book and given up their time and their expertise. A particular achievement of the book is that all the proceeds, so the royalties which have been raised, are going to Journey to Justice, a charity which does a lot of work in the community. So as such, the contributors basically wrote for free. So, investing a lot of time in actually writing the chapters and researching them, but then also editing them and then re-editing them again when me and Rachel were hounding them for further ones. And it's really, really great to know that as a result of the royalties and the work that we've done, that they've been able to invest in a new project researching stories of disabled and neurodivergent activists, past and present, and activists around mental health. So if you do get the opportunity to have a look at Journey to Justice's website, then that would be fantastic.
Well, thank you, Alex, for mentioning that. And I'm so, so glad that you did, because I think that is really, really important for people to know how brilliantly the history teachers have been galvanised and the history community have come together to back that really important cause, Journey to Justice. And we'll certainly make some links to that within the podcast blurb as well. Brilliant. Rachel, any final comments from yourself?
I think I just echo everything that Alex has said, really. And we're so, so proud of it. And it really does mean so much when people get in touch and they tell us that, a particular chapter has been really helpful or they've taken a lot from the book. And, if we read a review. It really, really does mean a lot. We, like Alex said, we didn't write this for fame or money. We wrote it to genuinely help history teachers, and to hear history teachers then giving us feedback and saying this has been, really helped us. That means a lot. So yeah, available at all good bookshops near you.
Absolutely. Well done. Honestly, well done, both of you. It's absolutely inspirational what you've done. It really is. I'm thrilled, and I could sing your praises all day long. And I really, really hope the reviews continue, the usefulness continues, and I look forward very much to a second volume when the time comes. Thank you both so much for being star guests on the History RETEACH podcast.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for tuning in. Bye.